You're going to sit lower than me. Maybe not. Give me my data. Don't touch my data. That's right. I'm only
All
saying.
right, all right.
I'm not going to sing with the mask.
Yeah, they're fine. We'll keep them off until, like, it takes a few seconds for it to, like, heat up.
Like that. Huh? How's that? Good. No problem. These chairs are kind of low, aren't they?
It's okay. I think the table's...
Table. Oh yeah, the table doesn't go down, does it? No. I think last time we had a. Oh yeah, it was. Okay. This one will just look like we're heads.
Just like,
Yeah, but it's all streaming's working,
like sort of...
and then locally we've got network, and people should be on their phones and they'll have broadcast.
Okay, everybody, it's noon. So I think we'll get started. Just a couple of notes off the top. Apparently the UHN Wi-Fi is down. However, the live stream is fine, and obviously your phones will work to send in questions using your data. There is a Michener Wi-Fi for Michener visitors. I can give you the password if you want that. I'll read it slowly. It's 665544332211. Okay, you can remember that if you start with 6. Okay. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on the live stream. I'm Jill Howard, the VP of Public Affairs, and I'm going to turn it over to Kevin right away. I think that the next slide up here is going to show you how to ask questions. So you can ask questions from your phone. They're anonymous. We will try really hard to answer them all. Kevin's going to start with a few comments, and then we'll go right to questions. And I think we've left ourselves more time for questions this time.
Yeah, thanks, Jill, and thanks everybody for joining us either in person or electronically. Apologies if there's any electronic inconvenience today. So here's a new question and answer page that's available to you. Just wanted to draw that to your attention. And as you can see on the bottom, normally you'd go to Slido and enter UHN 0927. Jill's given you a much more complex password that you probably can remember for today. And you also can go here to make sure that I'm answering your questions along with my colleagues from the senior team. And look forward to you using this. Hope it's a useful tool for you to get information, ask questions, and ensure that we get answers out. So reflecting on my first 100 days, which feels like it was a whirlwind, and it's been amazing. The most important reflection for me is what a privilege it is to work here, and what a privilege. I think I have the best healthcare job in the country, and maybe the best job in the country, but definitely the best healthcare job in the country. And the most impressive thing, I think, has been the people who make up UHN. Just unbelievable folks, all who really are trying every day to put that mission forward of the needs of the patient come first. And the fact that you chose that language is impressive. I want to also recognize that while the needs of the patient come first, very, very shortly thereafter are the quality of work life of the providers has to follow for the needs of the patients to be well met. And I know we're doing a ton of work on that. There's a survey active right now that Emma will insist that I remind you to fill out. So we really get what you think. And I also want to recognize that as we talk about safety and quality, that we're doing so in the context of you every day being challenged by overcapacity. And I know that it's sometimes difficult to bring your very best self and skill to every encounter when we're operating over capacity, and you're doing a great job almost all of the time at doing so. So thank you for that. On the occasions where we miss, take a deep breath. Remember that it's as tough as it is for us, it's even tougher for the patient. This is one of the scariest days of their lives when they visit us. And we will get through by continuing to focus on expanding capacity. And I hope creating new models of care, including integrated home-based care, so that you and we can allow flow and capacity to be maximized and make quality of work life better for everyone and quality of the patient experience better for everyone. Some nice photos up there. I want to thank the Team UHN for making me so welcome and also sharing so much with me. It was a bit, or has been a bit, like drinking from the fire hose. It's an amazing place with so many remarkable people, unbelievable science and research, inspiring education, and of course, really compassionate care for truly among the sickest Canadians that we have the privilege of serving. I've seen, I think, pretty much, I haven't made it to one site yet, and I want to apologize for that. It's on our agenda. Grace is cracking my whip, and I will be there very soon. But the consistency of the message of the pride that people feel in their programs and in their work teams was really, really impressive. So congratulations to you for that. Let me take a few minutes to update you, and this is we're building the airplane while in flight on the 2019 through 2023 strategic plan. And I know a lot of you have had a lot to do with this and the process that came before this. I think we've tried to build on both the new work and the very strong strategic work previously. What do we need to focus on in the next 5 years has really been driving this plan. In my first 100 days, I heard from a number of you, it's intriguing to think 30 years out, and we should be thinking about true system transformation, but we also need to think a little more near term because of some of the things that you all need in order to do the best work possible, be it in clinical care, in education, or in research, and the translation of those into practice. So based on your feedback and the language, the board, let me tell you, we took some of this to the board this week, and the board was very reinforcing. I think they pushed us quite legitimately, as boards should, to say, you know what, some of that is basic and we should be doing it. We want to see some more inspiration in there. We want to see some more stretch and dream. And so we're going to be working with you again and working with some experts in strategic planning to take this and really ensure that we incorporate that dream state. It has, I want to say proudly, also involved our patient partners and will, between now and December, involve many more people, both inside the UHN family, within the TASN family. My intent is to take it to the Toronto Academic Health Science Network table, and of course to push this out to as many consumers and partners as we can. So not new to you, deliver exceptional patient experiences. I think what is new in that language or in that intent is in true partnership with the patient. I think in the past we've had the language of patient engagement has been long-standing, but what does it actually mean to partner with patients? What does it mean to really have to borrow from the language of the commercial sector, a customer or client or patient experience that is driven by them and increasingly across the continuum. Very few of us really want a primary care experience divorced from a post-primary care pre-acute, an acute experience, a post-acute experience, a home care experience, and possibly a long-term or palliative experience. We really want that engagement, and we really want to understand from patients what they expect of us and what we can what is our promise. Secondly, again, I think our language is a little yet imprecise, but the concept here, I'll try to develop around the language, accelerate our progress through deeper integration within and across care, research, and education. And what we heard over and over and over from you and many of your colleagues was one of the very special things about UHN is the unique balance that occurs between those, that frankly, very few places in the world that most of us have worked have seen the same kind of interplay between education, research, and clinical care, that it really is unique here, and that it can be even more unique. That, the dream might be every patient who's served at UHN could and should have the ability to be involved in research. And if it isn't a trial or an investigation happening here, maybe it's us connecting them with centers that are enrolling patients in trials. Every learner, and learners will increasingly include patients, has an opportunity for collaboration and integration. Empowering and investing in Team UHN, again, from the board, the expectation, I think, legitimately is we are doing that. We should be doing that. That's an expectation of a good employer. What's more than that? What's the reach of that? Can Team UHN be the best academic health science center network and best academic health science center team in the world? What would that look like? What are the outcomes? Including what does that look like from the perspective of an employee, a physician, a volunteer, a patient partner? Relentlessly pursue discovery and innovation. So there's no question that our research team and our board and many, many, many of you would say to pause is to regress in research. Even to take a deep breath and not continue forward is to regress in research. So how do we keep pushing forward? How do we grow the research footprint? All of us would agree that the longevity from research discovery to implementation into practice could and should be shortened. I think the literature says it's a 7-year journey. How could UHN be the best place in the world to translate our own discoveries into our own clinical practice? How could it be the best place in the world to take our pedagogical research and translate it into new educational programming? And how could it be the best place in the world to take learnings from research and translate it into patient communication and patient-centeredness? Last but certainly not least, lead and partner, and I want to underline the word partner, the New World Order. We don't need to deliver everything. We don't deliver everything, nor should we, to drive the application of emerging technologies and transform healthcare. And on this one, I think it ties really nicely back to the work that you all did prior to my joining UHN in population health. One of the important dialogues for me has been asking people at UHN, what do you mean by population health? And a number of people have come back with slightly different answers, interestingly. I think I'm going to boil down what I think I heard, and you all can correct me in the question period if I get it wrong. I think I heard, well, we all recognize that the health of a population, only about 20, maximum 25% is about what we at UHN do, illness care. I know we do some prevention as well, and we do lots of primary care, but the majority of UHN, we actually care for people when they have an illness. We, in some programs, do a modest amount of prevention. But you know, again, from the literature, that population health means a job, so employment security, income security, housing security, food security, water security. So areas that, frankly, I don't think that UHN can deliver on entirely, 100%. What we can do through partnerships and through connections is ensure that those that we have the privilege of serving are well connected as they move through a system like that. When there are pieces of the health of the population that we don't directly offer, so for example, Public Health Toronto may be very focused on smoking cessation, then it's how do we make sure that our clients, our patients, are well connected with their programs. For serious mental health consumers, we know a job, a friend, and a place to live are actually the most important things in quality of life. Dr. Hodges will correct me if he disagrees. At the end of the day, we can't deliver most of those things, but we can absolutely deliver the appropriate medical care to serious mental health consumers, and then ensure that they're connected with environments that can give them appropriate housing or work with them to secure appropriate housing. Environments where appropriate employment opportunities exist, including right here at UHN. So Emma and her team looking at how are we engaging and targeting mental health consumers as future employees, or working with our employees who we already know, many of you, as all of Canadian society, struggle with mental illness and addiction. Are we doing as well as we could there? So I think the population health lens is alive and well. It's just focusing that a bit more on where we can have outcomes. Have I forgotten anything, Jill?
I don't think so. So that slide gives you
Well, maybe I'll leave it on there.
how you get.
I'll just leave it there in case people want
it's
to.
at the bottom. So if people have questions, they should send them to us, and I will do my best to sort of, I was going to start with questions, but apparently everybody's been busy. So I guess everybody is thinking about this provincial government, what their plan is, what it's going to mean for us. Can you talk about, Kevin, what you know so far?
Sure. So I've had the privilege of meeting with a number of new officials, including folks from the Premier's office, folks from the Minister's office, the Minister herself, and a number of other, the Deputy Minister, a new Deputy Minister in Helen Angus. And I would say that at the moment, you know, the old adage of forming, norming, storming, they're in the forming phase. That this is a government that is taking its time in ensuring that they staff up appropriately. At the moment, I would say they are focused, as you heard last week, I think, from Minister Fedeli. Ontario, after working with PwC and the Auditor General, has identified a $15 billion structural deficit, which means a year-over-year deficit, so a deficit that has to not only be one-time savings, but base funding savings. I was encouraged by the fact that the Finance Minister didn't say, and we will be balanced by Tuesday, right, which would be a bit scary. He didn't say when. He did say we will be moving into a more fiscally responsible, cautious environment. And so I think few of us believe that when 43 cents of every Ontario tax dollar goes to healthcare, if you've got a $15 billion hole, none of it will come from healthcare. It's pretty much impossible to balance the budget without somehow affecting the cash flow and spend in healthcare. That having been said, the Premier was very clear in his campaign. This is not about frontline job loss. So our hope is that we'll continue to work with he and his officials on how one protects that. I know that the government is absolutely open to three important initiatives. One, where can we, you, the people closest to delivering care and scholarship, where can we save money? So we need to really be ambitious in going out and talking about, are there opportunities where we can and legitimately should save some money? And I know that's often hard when you're looking at the capacity issues we're struggling with. Equally, where could we redirect our own resources to our own problems, as opposed to hope that those will be funded by new resources beyond that, a deeper hole than $15 billion. That's at just by the way, about 11.2% of the provincial budget. It's about $130 billion budget a year. So, you know, that is not an insignificant amount of savings over a period of time. The third thing I think this government's been very clear about is we are interested in growing the economy, jobs. And there is no health system, academic health science center, better than UHN to recognize the number of research jobs, the number of innovation jobs, the commercialization, the spin-offs. They're all taxpayers, they're all voters, and frankly, they are wealth engines, wealth creators, not only wealth consumers, as we are sometimes seen by as hospitals and healthcare delivery agencies. So I think the last part of that is, first, they really want to focus on find the savings, then, and only then, will we begin to talk about where do we want to make investments. It won't surprise you, there was one issue in the platform of this government: end hallway medicine. So I see Scott sitting there and Jan sitting there, and I know these last couple of weeks, I think at the General, for example, we had more hallway patients than we've ever had before. Is that roughly correct, Scott? Yeah, Scott is nodding for those of you who can't see him. And that's worrisome, and it's not yet flu season. So clearly, the ending hallway medicine not going to be an easy task, but I have every confidence, and having talked to many of you and many more to be engaged, UHN can come up with great ideas to demonstrate to Ontario and to our funder, how do you do that? So my personal bias is you do that by saying we will strive to have the lowest length of stay in the continent, but we will have a program that extends beyond the walls of UHN with our own purpose-built, purpose-driven home care agencies. And that it really does mean it doesn't matter where you're at, whether you're at home or you're at a UHN site or perhaps a long-term care residence, that we actually can continue your care and deploy the high skills of UHN and partner agencies. So I think that's where our focus is likely to be.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions in this list here about the provincial government. I think we'll move on to the issue of decision-making processes in the organization, because everybody's voted that up to the top. And maybe your observations so far and how you think we can improve decision-making.
Yeah, I hope that I heard from you that there's a bunch of decisions or a bunch of requests or investments or changes in how we do things that have been tabled or were believed to have been tabled, and that you sometimes saw it go up the pipe, but it never came out of the quote-unquote black hole. I hope that there isn't a hole, and I'm going to do my very best with my team and colleagues to make sure that that isn't the case. So I think sometimes, to be very frank, a quick no is better than a no answer. So I think, and I don't think anybody should be surprised when we're talking about $15 billion structural deficit and a bunch of questions that says, please, can I have some more? I probably can safely say today, no, unless we can find some way to redeploy the resources, number one. Number two, I hope decision-making can be enhanced by pushing it closer to the local units. So we have very strong people, clinical managers, support managers. Increasingly, we need to hear, what do you want to do, not what should we do? So we really want you to come saying, I looked at the issue, I looked at the options, I've looked at the risk, I've looked at the values and strategic plan of UHN. My unit wants to do this, and this is why. And that should then go to the most appropriate decision maker. In the case of a unit, the clinical manager, the director, and then a vice president. For those things that require, so I think in many ways the senior team should just get out of your way, and I'll make a commitment to do that as much as possible. When it requires a strategic direction, major investment, risk, issues that the board would wish to be involved and aware of, then I think we can be quicker in highlighting those issues, putting a process, the minimum process required, and I say required, in place, a bit of great strength to risk mitigation. So most of the reasons I've seen sometimes decisions a little bit slow in all hospitals, not only UHN, is we do get hung up on risk. What does it mean? What would happen? And I think our team is well prepared across the organization to say there's a lot of risk of not doing anything as well. So you know what, it's weighing against that, and I know, talking with the vice presidents and the chiefs and the program medical directors, that there is a thirst to make some rapid decisions. So I think turn the corner on that, and people really want to get on with it. I think one of the most important rapid decisions we've already made and launched on, I'm really happy to report to you that the day before yesterday, I think, or yesterday, we have formally begun our journey to a new health information system. So we have pushed the button. It is out there. It's called an RFSQ, and I'm not going to tell you what that means, but request for quotation, request for supplier qualifications. So that's a fancy way of saying we're following the rules of the procurement officer of the province of Ontario. I also heard, and I'm really pleased to say, and we were able to prove it untrue, you know, oh, it takes a long time to buy things here. It takes a long time to procure things here. It takes a long time to do legal things here. I have to tell you, I never have seen a team move quicker to get this done than Team UHN has done. So kudos to our digital team, to our procurement office, to our legal office, to any number of folks. But the race is on. In 27 days from today, that'll close. Then we'll begin the selection of the appropriate vendor. Then we'll begin the negotiation of the contract. Then we'll implement a new, and I want to draw your attention to, I think in past, UHN has used the acronym CIS for Clinical Information System, and I am consciously changing that to say HIS, Health Information System. The future is not about a clinical information system in isolation from the social and societal needs of that patient, nor is it about an acute care length of stay. It's about the journey, and we want our clinical information system to be of value to primary care, to be of value to home care, to be of value to social services. So that's where we're building.
Okay, so I'm going to move to the top question because it's about a whole lot of things, and I think coming into flu season, it's probably one that everybody's worried about in terms of illness of our employees and staffing. There's also the issue of what people are recording as abuse of sick time. That's a very hard thing for anybody to know because you don't actually know why your colleague is sick and what their situation is. So can you take a look at that and sort of respond to that thought?
Yeah, so first I want to say I know our occupational health department and human resources do a lot of work on this, and I want to also say every hospital I've ever been in, this is a question. I think the good news is everyone wants to deal with poor performers. Even some of the less than high performers want to deal with the even lower performers. So that's a good message, I think. That having been said, many will draw our attention to the sick time piece is a lot about the fact that we've had high overtime. We've had a lot about the fact that we've got unfunded beds that we have to open rapidly, and we're getting people to work too much, frankly, not too little. But let me also point out to you, in a very crass economic way, if we were able to reduce sick time by 25%, which would make us around the average of Ontario, we're a little bit better, frankly, but if we're able to reduce sick time by 25%, that's about $3 million, right? That's 10% of what we're likely to have to find this year. And that's just to take us to the average of Ontario hospitals, right? So, I think each of us has to ask the question, when we're leaving our teams working short, is that in the best interest of each other and the patient? Now, please don't confuse that with, if you're really sick, you absolutely should not come to work. No question about that. But in the absence, particularly if you're in an area where we have to call in alternate staff for sick time, we can only ask you to be a little more mindful of that. I hate to boil it down to something as crass as this, but $3 million is a lot of worked hours. So $3 million, how many, I'm not picking on nurses at all, I would never do that, but they're our largest employee group and they're our largest cost center. So if you said $3 million is how many nursing positions? 30 to 40 nurses who we would not have to, or you would not have to say, gee, I've got to find 30 or 40 positions to lay off in the next fiscal year. Like, that's a big, big, big difference. And those are the kinds of realities I think we're going to face. If there's abuse, please report it. Like, there is absolutely zero tolerance for those of us who don't want to be a good employee. But if you are really ill, obviously, we also want to be supportive of you. So all I can say on that one is I don't believe anybody comes to work every day to do a bad job. If there is a particularly high sick time in some environments, I know Emma and the team are drilling down to understand why. And those are metrics we're going to hold up and ask some questions. Is that a failure of us as management? Is that a failure of the environment? Is that a failure of flow and demand? Is that a failure of high risk for infection? And then try to get to the bottom of that one.
Okay, there are a number of questions here about our physical plant. I'm going to sort of try and group them. There's one about the Toronto Western OR as an update. There's the question about all of the physical plant, the outdated premises, and what we're going to do about that. So I think, can we group that and talk about the physical plant, how we're going to invest?
Right. So I'm happy to say at this week's board meeting, the board members, led by Mr. Porter, really pushed the agenda, saying, you know, we actually do have a lot of real estate, and are we maximizing it? Some of it's vacant, some land that's used as parking lots, some other areas where there is green space. And one of the great things about a remarkable board like ours is they have expertise in this domain. So they've embarked on a model to say, how could we leverage some of those resources, some of those physical plant resources? Do we need all the land that we own? Should we sell some of the land that we own? Should we lease some of the land that we own? Should we partner with the private sector and build something that on the bottom floors are commercial and on the top floors are research or clinical, but the bottom floors could help fund the debt for the top floors? So I think that we're on it. The other piece, I think, is as we go a little bit further down the road on integrated care, if we were to say, and I'd love us to say this, we're going to be the lowest length of stay environment on the continent, if and only if we're able to support our patients at home and elsewhere using technology and other means, would that significantly improve our ability to right-size our physical plants? All that having been said, even if we were 100% successful on that, and that's a bold hope, it still wouldn't say for the existing sites they're anywhere near perfect. So the good news, and Jan can correct me, we've launched, I think, on the OR redevelopment at the Western. That's really good news. Ron's here. Where's Ron? I saw him. Oh, there. Ron, I think we're moving forward rapidly also on the ERs at both sites. Any other ones high on your list that I should mention? Great. Yeah. So for those of you who might not have been able to hear that, Ron was basically reinforcing we're underway with the OR redevelopment at the Western. We're moving forward rapidly on both ERs, which both of them I try to walk through frequently, and wow, these are not ideal environments for Canada's most intense academic health science center. And increasingly, as I look at many of the buildings, I know that we're going to have to address that deferred maintenance. The good news is we have actually put, thanks to Darlene and the finance team, a significant amount of money, I think $30 million a year, into initiatives like that. Plus, I'm going to be passionate and obsessive with the ministry about making investments in, again, Canada's most intense academic health science centers, many areas of which only are the only place to serve some of the patients that we have the good fortune to care for. The same is true, I know, even with the redevelopment. Marnie is here somewhere. There she is. Even with the redevelopment at Princess Margaret, the growth of cancer, we're probably behind the 8 ball before we're done. So again, we're going to have to be looking at where else can we do it. Does it all need to be in our acute care sites? We have a number of non-acute sites that we need to think about. So we're going to just keep pushing forward on that one. But the good news is I think we do have an investment plan. You have to be a little bit patient with us. I'll beg your indulgence. The bandwidth of both the clinical teams and the redevelopment teams to do everything at once just doesn't exist. And in the backdrop, if we're going to implement a new health information system, that's going to take a lot of attention, a huge amount of attention. So it will be over the next couple of years striking that balance between, one, are we going to have to find savings? Possibly, probably. 2, we are launching a new health information system, lots of bandwidth. 3, a bunch of redevelopments that are essential. And then 4, getting to that deferred maintenance. So we will absolutely work on that. But give us ideas. So if you think your program, actually, we don't need to do it here. We could do it in a mall, or we could do it, in a different site, which would allow us to free up space, redevelop that space, and flow it differently. Last but not least, unbelievable foundations at UHN. So the generosity of donors, big and small, when they see some of our physical plants and they're attracted to the mission of each of our clinical programs, we are the most fortunate hospital in Canada in terms of investment. So I think we also know that some of these things will be addressed by our generous donors, most of whom come to us because you've touched them. You've cared for they or their families, and they want to make it better for the next folks.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to try another grouping, which is really, I think, down to the focus on civility and respect. You've talked a lot about that since you've been here. I've certainly heard from people saying it's nice to hear that civility and respect are something that Kevin's passionate about. There are some questions about, so what have you done about it? Which I think is a little difficult to answer, really, if you're talking about individual choices. But I think, Kevin, the question is, how do you judge civility and respect? What do you see day to day, and what do you try and do yourself?
Well, you know what, I think the first surprise for many of us, and was a surprise for me, again, not at UHN, in many, many places. I think many of us, I grew up thinking that when my parents said to me, be nice, that I know what that meant. That isn't the same bar for all of us. So I have to say, on a couple of occasions when I've had conversations with colleagues in my first 100 days that said, occasionally your name gets associated with less than the standard we're hoping for. That's a surprise. It's like some people say, no one's ever told me that before. Or that's always the way I've behaved here, and it seemed to be the way I got things done. So first, I think you have to be respectful in your feedback to say, do you appreciate your being perceived this way? Second, do you need some help? Are there things going on in your life, as we know, in healthcare providers and those who support them? Mental health and addiction is a big issue. Do you need some help? If after that the behaviors continue and are egregious, then I think you're into, are you in the right place? Because you sure don't seem happy, and you sure aren't interacting with people who are enjoying interacting with you. Maybe UHN isn't the place that you're finding fulfillment, but that's the place you end, not the place you start. I hope people are seeing in me behaviors, and our senior team, our management team, that first and foremost, we start with that. I know our board expects that, and our board behaves in that manner. I think the other piece is calling that out, so the fact that we are having those discussions. I want to compliment many of you who I know are running searches and reviews and recruitments, and I actually have heard and have seen you talking a lot more about that in your processes. And I'm told, I wasn't here, but I'm told, Jill, you could correct me, that's actually much higher on the agenda of those search committees, review committees, recruitments than they've been before, and I'm pleased by that. I also know that Charlie and Brian on our medical staff side have also been working on leading physicians towards annual educational plans and much more behavioral assessment and feedback. So that's good. I'm also pleased to say through the dean and provost of the university, I've had great receptivity of alignment because frankly, most of our medical staff and scientific staff, we share them. So they're faculty at the University of Toronto and medical staff or scientists of University Health Network, and we need to make sure those things are aligned, and frankly, the feedback loop is there. The other, Emma's just briefed me yesterday on the update of our, Emma's going to give me a hard time when I say whistleblower policy because I've got the name wrong, but I'm allowed to say it. And so when do you use a whistleblower policy? And you don't start there, but I have heard a few people say, I'm afraid to report, Kevin, right? I think it'll harm my career. And you know what, there is a vehicle for that, but that's not the place to start. We need to start first as colleagues. So Jill saying to me, we work closely together, hey Kevin, you didn't hit the mark today. Are you okay? Secondly, if I continue not to hit the mark, maybe a little feedback, if you feel safe and comfortable with your colleague doing that. Third, back to the supervisor, director, manager, chief, whoever, we all report to somebody. In my case, it's Mr. Porter, the board chair. They should get that feedback that, you know what, I'm worried about. If you feel threatened or if it's egregious, so it might involve the criminal justice system, it's about theft or fraud, that's where the whistleblower policy really comes in. But most of the time, I'm hopeful that this is going to be resolved by talking to the individual and then talking to those they report to. And I can assure you already, since this focus has been on, every member of the executive team and I have had conversations about individuals who've been identified as needing to improve. Again, I'm trying to bring that view of start with, are you okay and do you need some coaching? And end with, I'm sorry you're in the wrong place if that's where you want to be. Can I just add one more thing?
Okay.
I want to distinguish between harassment and performance management. Because I've heard a couple of people say, and even had a couple of emails, and I welcome them. I want to say I thank you all for the emails I get from you. I learn a lot. For your supervisor, chief, vice president, CEO, board chair, to give you feedback on how you need to improve in your job is not harassment. That's performance management. And I can tell you, if Mr. Porter told me, Kevin, you need to up the game in, and I said, oh, Brian, I think you're harassing me, I don't think he would receive that well. But you know what? Mr. Porter is an outstanding example of giving me respectful feedback with examples and behaviors and resources if I need help on where to get that. In his case, he's been so generous to actually allow us to draw on the amazing resources of Scotiabank. So I just want to make sure that people are clear. I am in no way, shape, or form suggesting that anyone should interpret at UHN when your performance is not up to the standard of UHN. You will and should get feedback. And if you can't accommodate that feedback and work on improvement, again, you don't want to work at UHN, because we are going to be the best academic health science center in the world with the best staff. If that's where you want to be, you're going to love it here. Now, no one should get a performance management program, though, where you feel you've been demoralized, demeaned, disrespected. But those are two very different things, and I just want to be clear on that.
So, I mean, that's the very difficult thing for people, because everybody takes constructive feedback in a different way. So I also think it's about learning to do that and to give constructive feedback, and it's not always easy. I'm going to group some questions because there's changes in the org structure. So there's one at the top, the question up there. So can you talk about the changes in the org structure and what you're expecting from that?
Yeah, so again, I think the org structure is a reflection of what I heard from you in terms of how can the organization function more effectively. And I want to, number one, say thank you to the people on it, especially those who it changed the dynamic and even focus of their work life. Mike Nader is a particular example that's in the question. So in chatting with Mike and talking about this COO role of past, and with the changes in the business portfolio and looking at streamlining the senior team, and because I'm new, I frankly wanted to be closer to our core business of clinical care, education, and research. And Mike was generous enough when I asked about that to be willing to look at a modification in the portfolio. I actually would say putting a focus on performance and data is a great strength that we enjoy at UHN, and I know that that's an area that I can work really well with, and the rest of the team with Mike. I also consciously, in grouping, I forgive the language and forgive me, those of you who are referred to as site vice presidents. I actually don't like that language. We might call you site vice presidents for the moment. You're vice presidents of UHN. Your responsibilities happen to include sites, but we're turning this organization from vertical to horizontal, and it doesn't matter what site I'm in. It matters about the patient journey across the continuum, before I get here, when I get here, and after I leave here. And so this org chart is to reflect, this is not about real estate. This is about the patient coming first, wherever they are in our journey. So to that end, the organization chart reflects that. The other piece that I heard loud and clear was, we got to get going on driving the redevelopment of a number of areas. The Western operating room's at the top of that list. And with Ron and the great team in FM Pro and Mike's background in the clinical programs, I saw that as an opportunity to marry two very important functions. I also I want to thank Marnie Escaf for accepting the chair of that group of vice presidents, and Joy Richards, as we really do focus on a clinical operations group. So I'm going to chair a group that really basically weekly brings all of our clinical issues and, whenever appropriate, research and education issues to that table with Brian as our incoming combined Chief Medical Officer and Executive VP Education, and Marnie, and these, sorry, I was using the term site vice presidents when I've already said it might be a bit of a misnomer, but that's really going to be the nexus of making decisions on the day-to-day basis, including the roll-up of our huddles on safety and quality. And, you know, for example, as we saw the other day, Scott, 30 people that we had nowhere to put at Toronto General. It's not a problem for Toronto General. It's a problem for UHN, and it's a problem for that patient and family. So I want us to be way less focused on real estate and way more focused on solutions, and that's why the org chart reflects this. On the business side of things, we've also grouped that a little bit differently, and I have to say I've probably pushed down a little bit the international attention, while I think we have to focus on getting some more foundational stuff here, like that health information system, like our buildings, like our appropriate retention and recruitment, and like the tools you all need to do your everyday job. Once we get those done, I look forward to pushing more of the international stuff up the pipe again.
So I think it's fair to say that we haven't yet started working in the new model, so that's going to take a bit of time to figure that out. I'm going to move to the lowest question on the thing, because it's something that you've said in this meeting. The ambition to have the lowest length of stay in North America is not something that all patients or staff think is a good thing. So, bit of a challenge back from the group in the room.
Good.
So can you talk about what you, I don't actually think you mean throwing people out before they're ready to go.
No, I don't. So lowest lengths of stay in the continent as a goal in hospital means creating a model of care that is not hospital-centric. What I'm saying is, let me pick on Charlie's discipline, respirology. So if you're, one of the number one reasons patients report to our emergency rooms are chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or emphysema. And in the good old days, you know what, they get here and the emerge doc would see them and they call Dr. Chan, and Dr. Chan might admit them or change their meds and they'd go home. And in many of those patients, they present 13, 14 times a year, right? In the New World Order, if you said, well, number one, it'd probably be better if we didn't admit them. Number two, and that's not for money's sake. So for me, the desire to pursue lowest length of stay in a true integrated continuum is because an acute care site is not the best place to be, or a rehab site, if you can be at home. So I'll just take a poll here. If I said to you, I can give you the same or better standard of care and you can go home, or I can keep you in one of our institutional sites, put up your hand if you'd say, I'd rather stay in an institutional site, as opposed to me supporting you, not just discharging you, forgetting about you and not knowing what happened to you, but truly supporting you at home through technology and warm lines and home visits. Anybody want to stay longer?
I'm going to say for the people watching, nobody's hand went up. I kind of think it's a fixed question, but okay, we're not there yet.
No, we're not there yet, but I think the other thing, Jill, we're a research-intensive hospital. Research tells us, in the latest study I've seen, cardiac disease or heart disease is the number one reason of in-hospital death in the United States. No reason not to believe that's true in Canada. Cancer or oncology, the second. The third most common reason for dying in an American hospital, I bet it's true in Canada, is hospitalization, right? Hospital-acquired infections and things that happen in places like ours. Even if that data is wrong, even if that study's wrong by 100%, it's the sixth most common reason, let's say. Why would we want to keep people in places that are not the safest place when we say our motto is the needs of the patient come first? So I totally agree with the question. You can't throw people out in the model of care we've got today. What you can say is, if I create a true continuum with home-based monitoring, with warm lines, with the appropriate kind of personnel available 24/7, that I can actually decrease the length of stay and improve the patient experience and improve safety. And it's been done in other places. It can be done here. UHN should lead the continent in doing this, in my view.
I'm going, it's not a question on the board, but I think it really speaks to the science and the research aspect. I believe you are aware that other reputable healthcare institutions invest in transforming ideas from scientists and AHP in initiatives that create efficiencies, saving funds, and even attract revenue. We have a lot of creativity at UHN that is not being properly managed. Your thoughts? And I think I'm going to add to that, we also don't necessarily adopt the best ideas from other places because we think sometimes we have to invent them ourselves.
Yes, that has been pointed out a couple of times to me. It's a very complicated issue in my view, and I actually spent a couple years of my life at the Wellcome Trust looking at this topic of scientific productivity and creativity and how you translate it into the best return. We are a university as well as a hospital. We're an academic health science center. It's very different than a commercialization shop. So number one is, first and foremost, do scientists, inventors, commercializers think that that's the best route for the dissemination of their knowledge? And not all do, frankly. Much of what we produce might not be patentable. It might be very important. And frankly, the reward system for becoming a full professor at the University of Toronto is not yet advantaged by commercial enterprise and still advantaged by research publication, not right or wrong. Some would say that's a much more appropriate direction because we are publicly funded and we should be sharing that knowledge with all, not only with those who have the commercial ability. On the other end, we also hear from government, and we believe, I think through our board, that there are many unique inventions and developments right here at UHN or in our partner hospitals in which we play a role that can be translated. And a number of infrastructures exist. I'd have to say back to, we complicate things quite a lot. We have our own internal legal processes, then we have our own internal commercialization processes, then we have Mars Innovation, and then we have the University of Toronto, and we all have policies and procedures. So I think through Brad Waters, we are trying to come back and say, how do you make this easier? One of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is bringing in some executives in residence, and these are very successful people from the commercial world who have most of the time now retired. Most of them have been remarkably successful, have all that bandwidth and knowledge base to say, you know what, Jill, I know you had a great idea and I love your research, but the probability of this being commercialized based on the structure of return on investment is less than 10%, and we shouldn't waste our time on that one. It's really important scientific knowledge, get it out there. As opposed to, you know what, Darlene has come up with an idea, it's tried and tested, and as a broad application, there'd be a broad market base, there'd be a huge potential revenue source. Let's take it to the marketplace and explore it. But these are people who spent their lives doing that, and we're going to attract more of those people to work with us in various domains at UHN.
I'm going to go to the third question, or whatever question it is now. It's about the up performance. It's really about the evaluation every year, or the opportunity for managers to sit down and work with staff about, you know, their performance, their goals, what they want to do, how the manager can help them. And I think the disparity between some people do a lot of this and it takes a lot of time, and others in the organization don't do it at all, which is a bit upsetting for people. So can you talk about performance management and how you think, or what you would like to see in the organization?
Yeah, it is, again, on that bandwidth policy of all the things that all of you are tasked with and trying to deliver on. How do we carve out an appropriate amount of time? I take it as a given. If you looked again at the literature, your span of control is way more than the literature would say it should be. Right? You all have many more people reporting to you than best practice in the private sector would say is ideal. And sadly, in the economic backdrop, I don't think that's going to change. We've gone through cycles, and Emma could talk about this better than I. So, you know, we went through the self-directed work team cycle where it said, you know what, performance management is actually best done by the local group and the local work team, and you should be self-managing. We've gone through the more, you know, annualized plan with deliverables and outcomes. We've gone through permutations amongst and between. And some organizations have said, we don't do performance reviews annually, we do performance reviews daily, right? If there's an issue, we should be addressing them on the day-to-day. So I think to a degree we may need some flexibility, and I know HR is already in an experimentation mode. Because at the end of the day, if you don't feel or I don't feel as an employee that this brings me much value and we're eating up a bunch of your time, then again, back to efficiency, probably we shouldn't do that stuff. If there's things that you want to have an interaction with about those you report to, should that be in more real time if possible? One of the reasons I'd like to kill more unnecessary meetings is because I'd like managers to be able to spend more time with their staff. And I think in many ways that's the ideal in development of feedback. But we do also need to document that. I think the other piece is you putting up your hand for development. And I know Emma and the team have put a lot of work into this, and UHN has invested a lot and is going to invest more in training and development programs for leadership development. In healthcare, many people end up in a management role or a leadership role because they were a great exologist, right? But no one ever said, well, but do you know anything about managing people? Do you know anything about managing money? Do you know anything about managing risk? Do you know anything about managing relationships? And many, 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 many of us stumbled into it, and along the way found generous mentors who helped us see how we could do better. But increasingly, we need to invest in that in our young and new employees who want to go that route. And there are many who don't, who say, you know what, I love my clinical or academic work. I have no desire to be a manager, a director, a chief, a vice president, a CEO, a board chair, whatever. Great. But for those that do, then part of it is aptitude assessment and emotional readiness. We should put some investment into that. That will mean, for some of you, because UHN, one of the great things about UHN is we have actually a relatively low turnover rate of staff. So people seem to like working here, although I think there are some groups who are a bit worried about young nurses particularly. But sometimes that means for other young people who want experiences, you have to leave UHN to get that experience and then come back. And I know Emma and Diana and others are also keeping a watch on what I'll call UHN alumni. And who's been here, who was impressive, who went to another environment, are we keeping our eye on them? Can we bring them back?
So a couple of things I can probably put together. Very briefly, your stance on working from home, and then this idea of executives in residence from the outside, but also saying we've got lots of great people here who may not be asked to do some of the kinds of things that an executive in residence could do for people. So first, work from home.
Yeah.
Second.
So, in principle, should we be exploring work from home based on the cost of our real estate? And of course we should. In reality, much of what we do is very difficult. Many of the jobs that we undertake are difficult. Now, again, in the New World Order, 5 years out, maybe even some of our clinical care could possibly be not only from our home, but from the patient's home. So I see that as an evolution. I think the challenge is, why do you want to work? What's the value in working from home? And what's the loss in your not being here with your team and the team's development and interaction? And I think, frankly, that's best left amongst the teams and amongst the groups of people who are delivering care. If the expectation is, and I know this isn't the case, but you'll hear the critics say, well, people who work from home are less efficient. The data actually suggests the opposite. But what is challenging in a clinical and academic environment is we spark off each other, especially in scholarship. And if you're not able to be with your colleagues and talk to your colleagues and kick around ideas, that'll be difficult. In a number of other areas where in clinical care, obviously it's virtually impossible at the moment, but again, some of those areas will emerge. And what do we lose if you're not in the workplace? The critics will say, oh, this is just people who don't want to work as hard. And I don't think that's true. I think there are some examples, transcription services in the past, number of jobs where people are working from home. I would say there's a whole bunch of those kinds of jobs that in 10, 20 years out are going to be dramatically augmented by artificial intelligence. And a bunch of you do work from radiologists and pathologists are already doing lots of reviews in the middle of the night from home. So we should explore it, but it really comes down to, can we meet our mantra of the needs of the patient come first, and great scholarship if you're not here.
Okay, I'm looking at the time. We've got a few more minutes. So there's the executive and residents. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm going to be again crass. Executives and residents don't get paid. If you want to not get paid and do that work, bring it on. But the challenge in the environment we're in is really and truly we need to find people with those skills, and I agree they do exist here. If you want to do some of that work, I'd love to hear about it. If you can do it, I forgive the language, off the corner of your desk. What we don't have the financial ability to do right now is backfill you and ask you to do that new work. What we do have with executives and residents, as universities have proven, remarkably successful people, usually who've been economically very successful, who want to give back. And they're bringing that skill for no new cost to the organization. But if you're one of those folks who thinks that you can provide some of that help and skill, and it doesn't add additional cost to the organization, we're open for business.
Okay, I'm going to go for one last question, and I do want to say to everybody, we have a list of these questions. We will be working on them. Kevin will answer them all. We will post them all on that site. I'm going to go to the question about transparency and openness, because I think it's said a lot, but what does it mean to you, and how do you think that we can encourage people to be open and transparent?
It's a really good question. I guess it's judged in the eye of the beholder. So I think many people believe they are open and transparent. It's only when challenged that you say, well, I guess maybe that didn't appear. Again, back to the discussion about performance management versus harassment. In this one, transparency and openness in whose eye. So, there are going to be things that in all of our jobs, just like in clinical care, that someone would say, well, I want to know something. I want to know how Jill disciplined Kevin for his poor performance in today's session.
Oh, I won't tell.
Exactly. And that would be inappropriate for transparency. So there are some things that shouldn't be transparent. So your interaction with, in a performance management sense, that I don't think that's open for business. Where we spend our money, what decisions we're making, how we're making those decisions. I think UHN's gone a long way in transparency on the caring safely piece, like just talking about the fact that all hospitals end up, by the nature of our business, of occasionally doing harm. Can we do better? Yes. You know this already. We live in a world that when you don't make some information public, or all information public, the immediate default position is, well, then you must have something to hide. And what I'm committed to is UHN has nothing to hide. UHN will respectfully use information back to our code of conduct that says it's disrespectful for us to share some of that information, and in some cases it's illegal, right? Particularly when it comes to personal health information. But beyond that, if you want to ask a question about how a decision got made or where the resources went, please email me or email Ask Emma, and we'll post that on these questions. These are public dollars, they're your tax dollars. We'll make it as transparent as we can.
Okay, and with that, thank you for this. I'm sure we'll do this again, and as I say, all the questions and answers will be posted as soon as we get that done.
Thank you all.